Welcome, everyone. We're about to start. We're just getting a few things in order, and a couple of our panelists will be joining us just momentarily. Thanks so much for your patience. And again, good evening, everyone. We'll be starting momentarily. Thanks so much for your patience. I see we're just having a few minor technical difficulties. It should be cleared up in a moment or two. Again, thanks so much for your patience. Well, while we're waiting for the resolution of some of those technical issues, let's get started. Let me introduce myself. My name is Joyce Moy. I am a member of the Oikos Institute Board of Directors, and I am the founder and CEO of a newly formed company, a startup, which focuses on financial empowerment. The name of the company is Fintelligence Strategies Incorporated. And I am so pleased to work with the Oikos Institute. I find that the thinking of the Oikos Institute group, the other members of the board, and the wonderful staff and community that I've had an opportunity to meet is going to have tremendous impact on the various communities that we seek to serve. I'm going to take a moment now and turn it over to Carla Whitlock, who will introduce herself. And I see that we do have our host, Reverend Lisa Hammonds, joining us in a moment or two. She's managed to overcome some of the technical issues we were facing. Carla, please go ahead.
Good evening. This must mean that we have very important information to share. We're having technical difficulties like this. I am pleased to be here and join. Again, I'm Carla Whitlock. I'm the principal of Sankofa Partners, and I also work with Crossing Capital, a sister organization to Oikos Institute, in a financial consulting role. And building community is extremely important to me. It's vital for me as a part of who I am to make sure that our communities grow and thrive, and that everyone has an opportunity to live in a place where they can grow and thrive. And so I am very pleased to be a part of this team and to speak about some of the ways that we can prepare our communities to receive grant funding, think about different ways of social impact, and generally ways to build community. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Reverend Hammonds, are you fully connected at this moment? Okay, again, we'll just give her a couple of seconds. This evening's program was going to focus on financial readiness for asset-based social impact and development. And one of the questions that Reverend Hammonds had posed to us was for us to talk about what is meant by asset-based social impact and development, and why it is particularly important for us to partner with communities of faith, particularly those in the BIPOC communities. And so I think at this point, I'm going to take the privilege, since I have the mic, of asking Carla for her perspective on this issue.
Well, if I could quote Lisa from a conversation that we had earlier today, our churches have traditionally been the anchor institutions. And so in addition to providing that vital spiritual nourishment that our communities have needed to grow and to thrive, they've also been places of community, of organization, of social justice, of economic development. And so the institutions have historically in this country played a very vital, holistic role in universally creating community. And so even more important today, in the wake of the political place that we find ourselves in this country, of communities that still need to be developed economically, from the amount of blight that has resulted from a number of government policies, the church, particularly for people of color in this country, continues to be a vital place. And you didn't ask me, Joyce, but I believe that this is an important time of reset for us. I mean, we're still trying to figure our way and pivoting through this pandemic. But what I believe it's shown us is, number one, the amount of resiliency that we have, particularly within our faith communities. And number two, how flexible and innovative we can be. And so while, there's still some very difficult hardships that have come from this, fortunately, a number of us have lost a number of people in our faith communities, I still see the benefit and how impactful it can be to be forced to be innovative and have to pivot and do things in different ways.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you in terms of your framing it from the perspective of community and strength and resilience. I think that for me, an asset-based approach to development of our communities means that we have to frame and understand the value of our communities. Our communities are not simply deficits. We are not simply blighted areas. We are communities that have assets. And as you know from the Fishing Differently model, the assets include intangible assets like faith, intellectual capital, social capital, and human capital. But in fact, we also have what we traditionally think of as assets, and that is the real estate and the property that is affiliated with the church. And what has happened is that society in general has ignored the assets that
Mm,
exist in our communities. And so I'm going to back up for a second and talk about the asset, the intangible asset of faith. To me, faith means that there is hope. And hope, unlike optimism, really refers to the fact that we believe that we are able to make change. And it is out of that belief that we can make change that we have hope. And the other thing we need to realize, again, is the value of our communities. As Reverend Sidney Williams says often, we do social impact. That
mm,
is what the churches have done. And so there's a need for us to connect what we traditionally think about in terms of our church community and our larger community with the terminology that perhaps people in the investment community look at.
mm,
And so I think that when we're talking about asset based social impact, we are talking about the fact that we are part of a community that is able to build wealth in the community. And by wealth, I mean better quality of life as well as economic impact, making sure that our community is able to thrive and be engaged in full economic activity in every facet of their lives. So again, I'm really grateful to Reverend Hammond for putting together some of the points of our discussion. And I'm
mm,
just going to continue on because it does appear that the difficulties with the technology continues. One of the things that we wanted to discuss tonight included what financial and supporting documents do we think funders are looking for when they're looking to invest in our communities? For example, when we're talking about funders, we're talking about commercial or private lending organizations,
mhm,
corporations, foundations, and even other philanthropic entities. And I know that this is an area in which you've done a lot of work in
mhm.
supporting the communities around these issues.
But if we back up one step, I don't think that we can I can amplify enough what you mentioned earlier about those intangibles. And what I heard you really saying is that it's missional. So whatever the pieces, however we choose to act upon the ways we're building community, it ties back to that mission that, the particular organization has. And so that really resonated with me. And I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that with what you said. I tend to call myself a reform banker. I spent more than 20 years in financial services in different capacities. And in one of those roles, I was responsible for the church lending policy. So the church in that sense, and the bank where I worked was very broad. So it could mean any type of faith community. And that's the way I'll use that terminology. So I want to talk about it in two phases. The first is the traditional way that we would think that anyone who would be lending us money, who would make sure that we're going to be good stewards, talk about those types of documents. So in that vein, we're talking about financial statements, and they could be either internal or externally prepared. If they're audited, they tend to be more robust. And so, of course, externally prepared and or audited statements would be generally the preferred method for many of the funders. However, they don't necessarily have to be. As long as the financial information is organized, is easy to follow, and is accurate, that typically is what funders, lenders are looking for from these types of organization. In addition to that, they want to know that the information is consistent. Is the organization checking all of the boxes when it comes to filing on time, filing appropriately, making sure that they are meeting compliance with whatever the IRS documents are. Typically, for nonprofit types of organizations, that will be a 990 that has to be filed every year. So we want to check the boxes of accurate, consistent financial information, same kind of way that we would do in our personal lives. We want to do that for our faith communities. But on the other hand, funders and lenders also want to understand the mission and make sure that the money, the capital that they're going to provide is going to be used for the reason that we say we need the money. So not just because we as a faith community would think that, oh, this is a great thing to do, we feel led to do this. Yes, that is part of it. But the other part is there is an identified need that is happening in our community so that we can match our passion, our skills with their capital to provide a solution. So, the standard documents that any banker, any venture capitalist, that anyone who we would expect to give us money would want to see, those are the types of documents and statements that we prepare. But in this world, we also want to make sure that we can effectively tell the story of what our mission is and how those funds will be used to find a solution for a critical need in our communities.
Yeah, that is so important. Having a banker or a funder's perspective. Here we are. We have
Lisa.
Yes, Reverend Hammonds has joined us. Thank you so much. I know that the technology was just not working quite right today.
It has a mind of its own. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm excited about joining this panel and being able to be the moderator for it. We are still trying to troubleshoot our third panelist, so we ask your patience. I also want to thank Dr. Williams for holding down the fort while we got started. And so I'll ask Joyce if you can just bring us up to speed. Have you all introduced yourselves?
Yes, we've introduced ourselves, and we've also started to discuss some of the questions that you developed for tonight. And we've just begun the discussion about the second question on financing, financial and supporting documents for funders and other folks that might be interested in investing in the work that we in the churches are doing.
And so from your expertise side of what you bring to the panel, what does that look like? And what do you see lacking is also a better question.
Okay, so we Carla just went through some of the kinds of things that a banking institution or a financial institution would want to see. I have a slightly different perspective because I have of course, a different background. But, when you look at a financial statement, we're essentially talking about a net worth statement, which everybody refers to really is as a list of assets and liabilities, right? And so any funder is going to want to know that the particular institution is strong. So one of the things we want to do is to make sure that we do an assessment and understand the true value of the physical assets that we have. Number one, cash, whatever cash we have in the bank, but also in terms of the properties that we have, the programs and other things that may be of value, and making sure that all of that is incorporated. And some of it may not be incorporated in terms of the formal financial statement, but we want to make sure that when we write our narrative for the funding, be it for investors or for philanthropists, that we capture all of the assets, meaning the things that derive or the things that actually produce the social impact that we have on the community. Because when we approach people for funding, we're not going there with our hand out saying we have needs. We are going there to say that we have assets, we have powerful impact. So outside of the financial documents, we want to make sure that that story is captured. In addition, of course, it's important to show income and expenses. You might look at it in terms of a budget, but we want to, of course, indicate that we have the financial wherewithal to repay a bank if we were, for example, developing the real estate that the churches own. And so, again, it's important that our books are kept accurately, that we capture all of our sources of income, as well as we carefully document all of our expenses. But it starts with us. We need to do an internal assessment to make sure that we are financially fit before we move on into any of these endeavors, particularly if you're talking about undertaking credit. What we want to do is undertake credit, but only where we know that it's going to be directly associated with a return on investment. I think that we owe it to our communities as stewards of the assets of the community, the investments that our community have made over generations through their tithes, through their service, through their devotion and the work out in the community. We want to make sure that there is a return on investment for all of the work that's been put in for generations, and also that we honor those that came before us and built and sustain these communities. So the financial perspective that Carla laid out is so important, but I think the narrative is as important in many instances.
Thank you so much. Carla, did you have something different to add? Because you had already mentioned what you thought was lacking for the readiness.
Mm-hmm. If I could amplify one more point that Joyce made, it would be if there is an opportunity for the investment to be income generating, that is a critical part of the story, the narrative that she mentioned. Oftentimes we think about the solution, the outcome, thinking about how this particular thing, item, asset, sometimes if that's what is going to be purchased, how that's going to solve a problem. And it's great and it's wonderful. And we want to do all things to make sure that our communities are growing. But as we're telling the story and thinking about what we're doing to build community, if part of that story includes something that could help us generate income over time and be more sustainable, that is a critical part that we need to make sure in thinking about these projects and thinking about ways that we're going to prepare for funding. That is a piece that I want to make sure our audience doesn't miss.
Thank you so much. Can we move on to, so what do you think is missing, or the mind shift, the rethinking of ministry that needs to take place for us to move from kind of how we've traditionally seen ministry, or how we've traditionally done church, performed work in our communities, to this new model of having social impact and using asset base for development and for social impact? What do you think that shift needs to look like in our minds?
Well, if I can start, again, I believe that we should begin to truly assess the value of the work that is being done. I think that, we go about the task, for example, of addressing food insecurity. We mobilize volunteers to help to distribute food. And we mobilize the volunteers to go and collect the food, bag the food, and prepare everything, and so on. And one of the things that we haven't been doing is truly capturing what the social impact is. It's not merely how many families did we feed. It is also how many people did we take care of that freed the local government, for example, and the social service agencies from having to deal with. What is happening is that our communities are addressing the needs of our residents, and we are taking the burden off the private institutions, the public institutions, and we need to put a value on that. It's not just us handing things out. It is more than that. When you feed people, you are not simply giving them something to fill their stomachs, but you're also nourishing them. And that has an impact on health. That has an impact on illness and disease that does or doesn't show up in your community. When we're feeding people and feeding them properly, providing milk for children, protein for pregnant women, and so on, what we are doing is investing in the future of our community, and we are playing a role in the prevention of disease and other things, which will cost the taxpayers if we did not do this good work. And we need to capture that data.
I would agree with that. Oftentimes what I hear in our faith communities is that we're not businesses, and it's true. Churches are not businesses. However, there is a business component that we need to be mindful of so that we can always be good stewards. So the first thing I would say is for us to change that narrative and not saying that we're not businesses. And I understand that what is meant by that, but to shift the mindset so that we can understand the importance of doing things decently and in order, and for us to be good stewards. And the second piece, I think, is really summing up what Joyce said, is for us to come up with strategic outcomes. It's one thing if we are solving a need, if we're making sure that families are fed, but going a step further, though, what does that really look like, and is it sustainable? So I would say number one is making sure we understand the importance of being strong stewards. And number two is producing strategic outcomes, not just necessarily solving a problem point in time, but thinking about sustainably providing a solution.
Wow. So you're talking about not just charity, but moving toward justice. And what does it look like to be able to have sustainable ministry or sustainable social impact in the communities in which we serve? Not
Exactly.
just putting a Band-Aid on something, but really being able to move the needle forward for a more permanent solution. And part of being able to do that is to capture the data, Joyce, is what I heard from you, and to be able to share that in a meaningful way that is going to allow funders and everyone around us to kind of know the total impact of what we're doing, not just numbers of food baskets, but that significant impact and what that looks like. That goes back to your question or your statement about narrative, and being able to fully articulate the impact of what we are making in these communities. Is that correct?
It is. And if we're talking about readiness, oftentimes funders are going to want to know that on the front end. They want to know what the story is. Is this a vibrant community? Why do you want to do this? But also on the back end. So there's going to be, generally, there is proof that any type of funding agency, capital provider is going to want to know something they're going to want to see related to how we're providing and doing what we're supposed to be doing.
So is that an evaluation mode? Is that some type of accountability for our stewardship?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So readiness, and if we're talking about readiness, not only is it what we provide on the front, but it's also making sure that we're prepared to be accountable for being that good steward that we know that all of us will be once we get this influx of capital.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Carla's point about sustainability. Funders are willing to help you expand something that you're doing and doing well, and we can show that through the data that we collect. But they are also interested in helping you start something where it's a good idea, but they don't want to fund you for infinity. What they want to do is to know that you can sustain this program. And so a lot of our thinking also has to be around what our next steps would be, what other allies or partnerships we can have, so that there would be a multiplier effect, because that, in fact, is what any funder would want to look for, whether it is a government agency or a philanthropic or foundation kind of situation. They want to know, okay, I can help you kickstart this. I can help you pilot it, refine the pilot, but then you're going to have to pick up the ball and run with it. We cannot stand alongside you for infinity. So we do have to show the sustainability and how we're going to go forward, even without their money. And a lot of the observations I have with nonprofits is that oftentimes the program dies when the funding dries up. That's it, because people are so busy working on that, they don't pick their heads up and think about what the next step must be.
That's an awesome point, and one that I hadn't thought about. I mean, I think that's part of the mind shift that we also have to talk about when we're being funded for whatever the social impact project is, or whatever the ministry is, that at some point you have to be able to develop your own legs. You have to be able to go forward, because we're in changing times. And so at some point, I can't really pick the date. Some funding cycles have changed.
Yes.
And so that those grants are not necessarily what they used to be, or readily available. And so we have to be able to show that once we get this money, that we'll be able to be okay afterwards. Is that what I hear you saying?
Two more points that I wanted to share with those as well. One is that we want to think about this work as being process-driven as opposed to personality-driven. Joyce really made strong points about sustainability. And what I've seen often is that you have that passionate champion, that person who set the vision, who ran with it, who's almost a one-person show. And then when that person decides to go and do something else, the program may die. And so we want to think about sustainability also from the standpoint of perpetuity, not depending on one person to make sure that the program can be successful. And along the same lines, we also want to make sure that if we're thinking about sustainability, we always have milestones where we can evaluate, because it may be time for some programs to naturally transition and for the organization to go do something else. So, I think that sustainability has many different facets, and I can't stress in readiness and in the beginning portions that we need to think strategically about what that looks like, who's going to be running it, how the process works, so that there's a playbook, so that many different types of people and many different types of individuals in the organization could help to support it. And then what it looks like when it's either time to transition to do something else, or expand it and scale it so that we have a greater impact.
This is great information. I'd like to also shift just for a moment when we were talking about what mindsets, what conditioning, what rethinking ministry looks like, and your experience about working with faith leaders, or with congregations of faith. Particularly, I think sometimes when we think about grants as clergy, as congregations of faith, we think about a grant to put on a new roof, or we think about a grant to be able to go and evangelize. I'm actually going somewhere with this. And so what mindset do we have to have or shift for congregations of faith, that social impact is not for improving your building per se? It is not about evangelism or proselytizing.
I would say that there should be a holistic approach to all of the issues that you bring up. It is important to preserve the physical building of the church. It is important to have a physical home for people to come to, and for people to feel that they are welcome and that they can share their thoughts and their heart in the mission. But at the same time, The purpose of the church exists regardless of whether there's a building or not. So you can balance the two. The heart of the church is a mission. The heart of a house of worship is the mission. And so I think, again, if you take a holistic approach, you can then work towards both having a well-preserved home, if you want to call it that. It is often, as was mentioned earlier, it is an anchor institution, meaning that it is a place that people feel comfortable in. It's a sanctuary. It's just like a school or a hospital, or the library. And so again, there is something to be said about preserving that, but we have to think more broadly. Also, the other thing I just want to point out is that when you are nonprofit, it does not mean lose money. Nonprofit means make money for the purpose of carrying out the institution's mission. And so we also have to rethink how we feel about money. I find this happens a lot in the academic arena. I just left a position at a university, and it's always kind of amazing to me how faculty members, again, rebuff the idea of bringing business ideas into the academic field. They feel that that's contrary to the mission of an academic institution, but it is not. If the money is used properly, and to use your terminology of stewardship, it will have the impact and it will fulfill the mission we're looking for.
Carla, we were just talking about any mind shift in thinking about, very internal focus of ministry, and shifting that to community focus. And I love Joyce came back and said, it's holistic. It's both and, not either or. And that we need to make sure that the physical structure is preserved. But that is in order to be able to serve the community and to be able to fulfill our mission, which is to take care of community. Did you want to say anything about that?
No, I just
because it's a setup.
Yes, no, that is perfectly stated.
So I want to pivot now to a question that a lot of our cohort congregations may be facing, and that is there an advantage or benefit of congregations establishing some sort of nonprofit status? And so I say that because 501c3s are oftentimes an IRS designation that has some pros and cons for that has different connotations for congregations. But within that broad traditional category of 501c3s, there are other different types of entities, including a CDC. And so I don't know who wants to talk about that first, and just kind of give us an overview of, first of all, what a traditional 501c3 is versus a CDC. And then let's talk about the advantages of congregations establishing those as it pertains to asset-based funding.
I'll start with an overview. And I'm going to build on what I heard Joyce talk about with the both and. You hit the nail on the head, Lisa, talking about the 501c3 designation. So churches are tax exempt traditionally. That means that you won't pay any taxes on the revenue, the tithes, offering, any of the pledges that come in. They're not going to pay that. And going a step further, the 501c3 designation from the IRS also means that organizations may collect funds, revenue, donations, and they have some kind of tax benefit for the donor. So when we're talking about faith communities, what typically happens is we may have a vision, we may have an idea, and we want to go and find a partner to help us achieve that. Oftentimes, foundations in particular, and others in the philanthropic community are not necessarily excited about partnering with faith-based organizations because they want to be sure that while the idea and the mission may be great, they don't want to get in the idea of into the area of proselytizing. So yeah, it's great, go feed the children, but don't tell them about this God person. So they typically say, not so sure about that because it's going to come with also, the story, the salvation story. So oftentimes then what faith-based communities will do is have somewhat of a separation, if you will. So establishing a separate foundation or a community development corporation will allow the church faith-based community to get those types of philanthropic dollars that the church by itself could not get. So even though it could be the same, typically the same people running the organization, same mission, same ideas, so the philanthropic community, for whatever reason, would prefer that there's a particular designation from the IRS, a tax designation, versus it being a traditional tax exempt church. So the bottom line is there is a greater opportunity for more philanthropic dollars if the congregation, church, synagogue decides that they want to have this special designation. So what comes with that is governance, is paperwork, is oversight to make sure that all of the requirements that the IRS sets forth are the ones that are happening. So think pros, possibility of getting more money, cons, a lot more paperwork, oversight, governance. Now, I heard you talk about the community development corporations. And so that is an offshoot of something that the government from the Robert Kennedy era in 1964 came up with to help communities revitalize themselves. So when we're talking about a community development corporation, the key word is community. It's supposed to be a way for communities to come together, to actively manage themselves and make sure that whatever the idea is, housing, workforce development, food insecurity solutions, whatever the plague is in that community, the community is going to be the ones to solve it themselves. So oftentimes you have the organization that started it partnering with neighbors in the area to make sure that they are self-governing and deciding what is best for that particular area. And since it is the CDC is a particular government designation, there are certain government dollars that various government agencies will help CDCs to get. So if we went in a line of talking about what it is, IRS designation could be anything could be a 501c3 with the correct oversight and the correct application. And then one step further, if an organization wanted to have some special help and really do the work of impactfully solving community solutions, they may think about setting up a community development corporation or a CDC.
Yeah, so I would agree. That was a wonderful explanation, Carla. I would say that it is possible for a church to set up a 501c3 to carry out much of the mission that the church is interested in. And it is an organization a charitable organization that carries with it much of the values that we find in the church that sets it up. The CDC is a different type of organization, and it should not be confused with a regular 501c3 charitable organization, because again, it is very much connected to community development. And with community development comes economic development. So Carla mentioned workforce development. It would also include entrepreneurship, and developing businesses in the community, as well as health programs and community service programs as well. So it can become a very, very good vehicle to capture certain dollars, such as government dollars, because again, that is the kind of organization that specifically could capture money from the agency that deals with youth for the purpose of creating programs to address the youth between the ages of 14 and 24, for example, or to address the issues of training and helping homeless folks be ready for entry into the workforce, et cetera. So it can be a very good vehicle for capturing certain kinds of dollars, whereas a charitable organization would capture money fairly similarly to the way that a church might capture money. But again, without the affiliation of a religious perspective, it is likely to attract many more philanthropic dollars, as Carla mentioned.
So, so for congregations of faith that are thinking about, is this what I need to, so do all congregations need a 501c3? Is it recommended that for social impact and for being able to capitalize, maximize, leverage asset-based social impact and development, is some form of 501c3 recommended?
I would say in general that I would recommend it. However, back to Carla's point, the oversight becomes extremely important. The record keeping, there's no fooling around in terms of, making sure that your board minutes are in
People go to
order.
jail.
Yes, exactly right. And that the funds are handled and flow through to the projects for which they were meant. Legitimate salaries should be paid, services that support the program, et cetera, should legitimately be paid, and so on. Sometimes what happens again is because there's this overlap, there may be some confusion in terms of commingling of funds and so on. And so the infrastructure has to be carefully laid out. And in fact, I would suggest that the board for a 501c3 really lay out a roadmap for the operations from the board down to the staff, and that there be regular meetings where there's careful review of finances and so on. And because any money that you get in the way of grants, and particularly if you were to get government money, it can be audited and there can be issues there.
I also have heard that well-rounded boards for 501c3s should be inclusive of professionals that are in the habit of dealing with business. So you might have an attorney as a member, you may have an accountant, you may have a local business person. In addition to congregational representation, you want a board to be well-rounded and to understand the gravity of the organization, the 501c3.
I would absolutely agree with that. The more input, the better. Also, nothing prevents an organization from having an advisory board in addition to a governance board. Again, just to get additional input, additional insights, recommendations, and ideas for the work that the organization does.
And so, Carl, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there are a couple of things that congregations need to be thinking about in the realm of getting ready for that conversation, or what they need to kind of be trying to put into place. Can you speak to some of that?
Mm-hmm. We talked earlier about some of the financial documents that are needed. So we talked about the total package for financial documents, including the income statement, the budget, which is very important. So I would call that the whole suite of financial documents that, again, need to be consistent and accurate. So that would be, the first step. Joyce mentioned the narrative, making sure that and for thinking about why we want to do it, really defining our why, why this different type of organization is important, understanding what that looks like. Because in setting one up, we will need a mission statement as well as a charter. And so both of those documents are typically really, they go deep in explaining the rationale behind why this is important, and it's important to this particular community. So that will be the second thing. And the third thing in preparing is making sure that the correct partners, the appropriate partners, are in place. That could be an accountant, it could be an attorney, and oftentimes that type of expertise is either in a particular congregation or in the community. So as we're thinking about what it looks like, those are the top three things I would talk about. And then the foundational piece through all of that would be communication. I cannot stress enough how important it is for a particular faith community to make sure that there is member engagement. Because we don't want it to seem like there is one person or a group of people who is pulling and dragging, or trying to force anyone to do something. When we're talking about building community development, corporations, community being the most critical piece, it is vitally important for us to be sure that the communication is ongoing, is consistent, and that it is being that we're listening as well as telling really what's happening. So I would say the financial suite, the charter and the mission or the narrative, the appropriate partners, including the financial personnel and the attorneys, but most importantly, the foundation of engagement and communication.
I think it's important, and I think and I say it sometimes in different settings, that I think sometimes congregations of faith think that we know all the answers, and it's important for us to talk to our community. It's important for us to talk to our neighbors, and important to talk to those around us, to find out directly from them what the needs are for the community.
Exactly.
I think oftentimes we think we just go in and we can if we build it, they will come. If we set it up, they will benefit. If we tell people what they need, then we can have social impact. And I have found personally, and I think it plays out, that if we exist in community, where we actually engage, where we actually interface, that we can hear what people really need more than we can tell them what we need. And if we have that conversation, that level of engagement, then that's the inroads to impact. It's not just about us coming in and saving the day. It's about us working together for solutions that are sustainable and that are impactful.
And along the way, effective challenge is okay. Sometimes I think because we're talking about churches, faith communities, we think that we always have to agree on everything, and that's not going to be the case. It's fine if someone wants red and somebody else wants green, and we meet in the middle and end up having purple. That's okay. And through the course of the conversation and through the course of engaging both with the congregation and the community, that effective challenge is going to happen, and that's okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of you, particularly with Lisa's comment about listening and finding out from the community members what it is that they need. Things are changing so fast. For example, I cannot even begin to think about how I could address the needs of the youth, for example. I'm currently working with an organization that works with many youth who are displaced or they're aged out of foster care, and now they're on their own. And the issues that they deal with might be somewhat related to issues that I might have dealt with in my younger years, but the overlay of things like technology, of the 24-hour news cycle, of the availability of guns, that puts a whole different layer on it. And I think that solutions that I may come up with may fall short because I do not have the lived experience. So for example, I was over at a center recently that welcomed these youth to come in, but only during the day. They had no place to sleep. The rules and the policies indicate that people cannot sleep there. So you have these young people who could not find a place in a homeless shelter or felt that a homeless shelter was unsafe for them. They would come in and they would have to sit at a computer desk, and they would nod off because they were not allowed to quote unquote sleep there. And so I think if you live the experience that these young people are living, or you listen to them and you ask them why they're falling asleep at the computer, you would get an insight that the folks that are designing these policies obviously don't have. So we have to have the people we want to serve at the table when we design our solutions.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that kind of diverts a little bit from financial readiness, but I think
Right.
When we start thinking about not only capturing our data, but that's part of our narrative. We need to talk about the communities in which we exist, and what our community needs are for our social impact. And so thank you so much for diverting briefly. I want to pause just for a moment and invite our participants to ask questions through the Q&A portal that's at the bottom of your screen. And I'm gonna, I don't know how to get on, but I'm gonna ask you if you have questions right now, if you would put it, it's not a chat, but it says Q&A at the bottom. If you would log on there or put your question in, I just want to make sure that everybody is tracking and doesn't have any questions. I'm also going to check Facebook Live and see if there are any questions. And bear with me, trying to do this. All right, so moving up. So what am I not asking with my questions? Joyce and Carla, while I'm checking the chat, I'm checking the Q&A, I'm checking Facebook. What am I missing in this conversation about financial readiness for asset-based social impact and development?
I want to stress that it's okay to be nervous about it. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay to be a little scared because we are moving into some very different times than we've done before.
What am I missing?
We're some very different times, even with technology, as we found out tonight, and trying to make sure that they were all prepared for them and trying to figure out the different mechanisms of technology. So I would say not to be afraid to start the conversation, even if we're not don't have all these things we've talked about. We don't have to have every box checked. There it will be, a consultant, a partner, a church member, a neighbor, that person who lives next door to the church, who always knows what's going on in the community. There's going to be a resource that God will provide when we have the questions and we feel like this is the right direction. So that's what I think sometimes our congregations are a little bit uneasy, unsteady, afraid to do something different because we're unsure, and that's okay. So that's the part that, I want to stress. We can tell you all of these things. We can give you every checklist. We can give you, every consultant. We can give you millions of dollars. But, each particular congregation leader has to be ready and be okay with not knowing what the outcome is going to be to get started.
Yeah,
I
think
love it.
The key, I'm sorry to interrupt. No. But I think the key really is to be able to spot the issues, know what it is you don't know, and seek out the answer. In addition to that, just to put in a little bit of a plug here, I think the Oikos Institute can be an amazing resource for many of the congregations looking at how to think about these issues,
Mhm.
how to approach or engage in the conversations, and then ultimately implement something that makes sense for them, whether it is ultimately leveraging and developing their assets or whether it's about looking for ways to carry out their mission.
Yeah, I would
And
agree with that, Joyce, because excuse me, in
no,
a lot of these instances, we're not doing anything that's necessarily new. We may be thinking about it in a different way, or we may be delivering the solution slightly different, but there have always been, religious organizations, faith-based communities that have helped in some way, that have provided housing, that have provided food, that have provided, health, mental health, and any other resource that the community has needed. We've done that. We've always done that. We just have to we'll be fishing differently. We're doing it a little bit differently now.
yay! Put the plug in, both of you. Thank you. This is something I want to follow up with Carla, because when we talk about financial readiness, we talk about asset-based social impact and development. We talk about fishing differently. I think, and it's probably going to go back to my statement about mind shift and reconditioning, rethinking ministry, because I don't want this webinar to kind of go without it being said, and I don't think that's what's being said, that because we're seeking alternative streams of income and we are preparing ourselves financially to be attractive to funders, to be able to be supportive of the social impact and development that we are having in the community, that is somehow antithetical to faith. And so we need to get in our minds that is stewardship, and that we consult our spirituality while we do that, but that there are some things that we can do to be able to attract additional streams of income to our houses of worship that go beyond the traditional tithes and offerings. And I think that a lot of congregations of faith are suffering because they are relying solely on tithes and offering. And that even if you are okay with tithes and offerings, that there are still funders that want to invest in the social impact being made by the congregation. And so I just want to be able to make it plain that even though we're talking about asset-based social impact and development that introduces alternative streams of income, additional streams of income, that's not anti-faith. And that our faith is what drives us to look and to seek for these alternative means so that we can have greater social impact in the communities in which we serve.
Yes, and I think it's actually an imperative. Scripture tells us that we should not bury our treasure. One of my favorite parables is about the three different people who decided to invest very differently. One person buried it and buried his talent, and that was the one who was looked upon least favorably. So, again, I think this is actually a godly mandate that we are, number one, strong stewards, but also we have that multiplier effect that Joyce talked about. If we really want to think about God's kingdom on earth, is to make sure that all are cared for and that our communities are as strong as possible. And we have example after example after example of the most successful communities, from animals to humans to biblical times to current times, being when we are coming together and we partner, and when we're all using our gifts and talents the way that God intended for us to use them. So I don't see it at all as anything that is a separation of who we are, of our whole being. It is who I am when I'm worshiping. It should be the same model as who I am when I say hello to the person on the street who may be unhoused. All of that goes together because all of it is about building community.
Absolutely. Joyce, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, again, it's a question of how you use your values to guide what it is that you do.
Mhm.
There are times when I'll say that, for example, give me the money because I will do something good with it.
Mm.
And that is the point of this. Again, that multiplier effect, but also we become a channel or a conduit for the funds to meet the needs of the community and not for the funds to be siphoned out of the communities. That's part of what happens with our communities. We are underserved, under-resourced, and we are undervalued. And part of that is because we do not capture the wealth within our own communities. We allow that wealth to be siphoned out of our communities. So if we're able to bring funds in through the vehicle of a what I would refer to as a trusted broker, the church, or another faith community. And then through transparency and through the mission and the work and the proper application, we do good for the community. Then we have done two things in addition to having the dollars circulate in the communities that have contributed so much to this country and so much to this society, as well as carrying out our mission at that point.
Trusted broker, I like that. I'm going to use that.
Oh, that's wonderful. So one of the statements in Facebook has to do with sustainability, and that's key. And so, Joyce, you brought that up. I think, Carla, you also spoke on that just a little a bit about, let me ask this question. So if congregations of faith had the means to sustain social impact, whatever that looked like for that congregation of faith, would not they be doing it? And or is the is a grant, is funding the catalyst and the catapult, the momentum to be able to get them into going into that program, and then they figure out how to maintain it, how for it to be sustainable going forward. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, let me just give credit where credit is due. The concept of sustainability was brought forth by Carla, but building on the comments that she made, one of the things that I want our constituents to be careful about in terms of the grant money that they either go after or accept is that you can't be opportunistic. What you want to do is go after funding or accept funding that aligns with your mission. If you don't, you're going to go off on a wild goose chase and wind up not fulfilling the needs of your community. So oftentimes I've observed this with nonprofits in general, an opportunity to receive money and to do a particular program, but it's not what you normally do. There is not a value assigned to that's aligned to the heart of the organization. And then you wind up either doing a terrible job, or you wind up diluting your core values and doing things that take you completely off in a different direction. So I think you have to be careful about that. So do not take things that don't align with your values, because those kinds of things cannot be sustained. You don't go and create a program and then try to sustain it because somebody throws money at you. So sustainability, again, has to be driven from the values of the organization.
Thank you. Carla, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I would amplify what Joyce said, that I've also seen situations where we've gotten grant money. Organizations have gotten grant money and did not have the expertise, the skill, the time to really make sure that it reached the appropriate recipients, or that we followed the plan, and organizations will have to send it back. I that is just magnificently sinful to me that, we get it and we're not able to align it, to use it, to execute, and we have to give it back. Because then when we ask again, what is that funder, that organization going to think if we weren't able to be good stewards the first time? So, I would caution us to be careful and make sure that we are appropriately aligning mission. And the other thing, similarly, I worked for a large corporation that had a foundation. And at one point, they were given scholarships and they were given to this. I mean, kind of whatever was in the community that was good. They would say, the governing board, the people making decisions would look at it and assess and like, yeah, okay, we're going to help them. And then they realigned. And this is what I saw a shift in the philanthropic community as a whole. They said, these are our mission. These are our missional values. So these are the 4 things that we are going to fund, and that's it. And so what Joyce was talking about with making sure that what we're asking for aligns to our mission is very much in line in what I've seen the philanthropic community do. If this is an organization that really cares about education, that may be all they fund. If there's an organization that cares about workforce development, economic development, those are the types of requests that they will support. So we have to be extremely careful, extremely thoughtful about making sure that we can stay aligned with our mission, because that's the way that, in my opinion, will be most successful.
Yay. All right, let me check and see what's any questions. I'm going to remind you again, if you have questions, if you would put them in the chat. There is a question in Facebook about a quote unquote checklist regarding the paperwork needed for financially being ready for funding. And so I don't know that I can type fast enough, but I would ask, Carla, can you jot those things? I know you did those earlier. Can you repeat what those things were?
Definitely. So whatever your income statement and balance sheet, your typical financial statement looks like, that's number one. Making sure that you can appropriately name how much money comes in, how much money goes out, and then what assets you have and what they're worth. So in whatever, it could be Excel, it could be, something fancier that an auditor put together, whatever that looks like, the most accurate and consistent document for your organization. That's the first thing. That's the general financial statement suite. The next one will be the budget, so that the organization understands really what you're putting on paper, number-wise, is what matters to you. If that looks like building maintenance, they're going to draw some conclusions for that. If it's salary, they're going to draw some conclusions from that. So think about, what that looks like. And that also is a part of readiness when we're preparing our budgets. Do the budgets align with what we value? I'll share a little story. I've been a member of my church here in Atlanta for a little over 20 years. And I became that person in our annual business meeting to ask if we're tithing. So we get a budget, and I look at the amount of money that we're spending for salaries and for maintenance and for all these things. And I look at the ministry dollars, and year after year, I'm asking, well, are we really tithing? And so, sometimes the answer would be, well, if you put this part in there, if you, mix this in there. And so I was that person who asked every year that, our pastors just started saying, okay, and we are tithing, with ministry. Our budget really speaks to that. So in talking about our mission, make sure that, in readiness, make sure that our budgets align with what we really care about. So we got the financial suite in whatever form that looks like. We got our budget. And we also talked about the narrative and how important it is to be able to, in a very coherent message, a way that lays out what's important, why we want to do it, explaining the why, that narrative is a big part of it. And what I mentioned before is that if we're thinking about setting up a particular type of nonprofit, then the charter, including a mission, is going to be a key part of the documentation that we have to have. And then the other 2 pieces I talked about are the appropriate partners, attorneys, financial consultants, community leaders, that person in the community who really knows everything and knows the history, has all that institutional knowledge about the neighborhood, that person, I mean, those types of partners. And the final piece that I suggested was the communication and engagement, making sure that there's a plan in place. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most polished type of, we're putting this out in social media and the prettiest newsletter, whatever that is, but it needs to be a consistent plan for how the congregation finds out information and how we're gathering information from both congregation and community. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes. And so let me just tell Facebook that I will type that up in response to the question, and we'll have those notes there. I think that's all. And you did a wonderful job. I want to share my screen. Following up on what Joyce said, we have the opportunity or the opportunity exists for us to engage at the 2023 Fishing Differently Conference. It's going to be held September 20th through the 22nd in Chicago at the Hyatt Regency McCormick Place. At this conference, we're going to continue these types of conversations. Not only will we have our presenter with Sean Ginwright during our luncheon, not only is Rosalind Artist going to be there, and Reverend Tracy Blackman, but we're also going to engage in some design labs. And so we'll be able to get some one-on-one help with anchor institutions to harness the power of our assets, what is social impact and how to be able to do that, and also to connect faith-inspired leaders and place-based investors and funders. And so we want to make sure that we do not leave our webinar today without giving you the opportunity to join us. If you go to fishingdifferently.com, if you go to oikosinstitute.org, you will be able to find a flyer that looks like this. When you go down here, then you'll see register now. So all you have to do is go to www.oikosinstitute.org, find the flyer, hit register now. The early bird registration ends, oops, it might have already ended, but try it anyway. And we would love to see you there. If you found this conversation valuable, you have more questions, you want to delve deeper, you're interested in finding out how your community of faith can have greater impact in social impact and development, then the Fishing Differently National Conference 2023 is going to be for you, and we want you to be there. Let me personally thank Carla Whitlock. Thank you so much for being with us. Joyce Moy, thank you for being with us. I am terribly disappointed that we weren't able to get Attorney Patricia Russell McLeod on. I know that she invited people to be with us, and technical difficulties. It's the devil's work sometimes. But we do want to thank her for accepting the invitation to join the panel, and for her wealth of knowledge that she would have brought. But we do believe that God is always in it. And Joyce and Carla, you really have blessed us, empowered us, and equipped us with what we need for financial readiness for asset-based social impact and development. So I want to thank you both for being with us. I want to thank all of our attendees, both in Facebook Live and in our Zoom webinar formats, for being with us. And if all hearts and minds are clear, any closing remarks, Carla, Joyce?
I'd like to remind us all that when we're thinking about any of this work, community, making sure that we're holistically inclusive and that we think strategically about what that looks like. It's all of us.
And
Joyce?
I certainly agree. I think, again, it begins with us and assessing and understanding our value, all that we bring to the table. And understanding that when we use all that we have, all of our assets. And then again, it is the fish, right? It's the faith, the intellectual capital, the social capital, and the human capital. And then, of course, the physical capital. But when you put all of that together and you identify the value of these things in your community, there is no way to go but up and forward. Thank you.
Thank you both. I would end only with reminding us that we are our community of faith, and that we have been entrusted with being able to further what the kingdom looks like here, right now. And that we have an imperative. We have a mission to be able to make sure that all of creation is able to flourish as it was intended and created to be. And so when we inherit and when we internalize that imperative, then we should not be able to sit on it, but that we go out and be the change that we want to see, and that we lead that in a way that would be pleasing and acceptable to the Creator. And so the church is not a building. We are the church. And our work is to show that to others and to share it. And so thank you both. Thank you all. And we remind you that we do this on the thing's going to kill me, on the third Tuesday of each month at 7:00 Eastern Standard Time. And so we invite you back next month for another webinar. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good night.